The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Dr. Amelia Richardson pulled her modest sedan into a space near the back of the dealership. She could have easily taken her luxury car, but today she wanted to blend in. Today was different. This wasn't about making an impression or showing off her success. This was about seeing the truth of what happened in her business when she wasn't around. 6 months ago, she had made the biggest purchase of her career. Richardson Automotive Group had been her dream for years, and acquiring this struggling dealership in the wealthy suburbs was supposed to be the crown jewel of her expansion. The numbers looked good on paper, but something felt off. Customer complaints had been trickling in, and the sales figures weren't matching the potential of the location. As a successful businesswoman who had built her empire from nothing, Amelia knew that the real test of any business happened when the owner wasn't watching. She had learned this lesson the hard way over the years, climbing from a junior accountant to owning multiple businesses across the state. Her mother had always told her that character shows when people think nobody is looking, and she applied this wisdom to everything she did. The dealership looked impressive from the outside. Clean glass windows showcased the latest models, and the building itself had that modern, upscale feel that attracted customers with serious money to spend. She had invested heavily in renovating the place, making sure it reflected the quality and professionalism she demanded from all her businesses. But today she wasn't here as the owner. Today she was just another customer walking through the door. She had deliberately chosen her outfit that morning. Instead of her usual business suits and professional attire, she wore comfortable jeans and a simple cotton blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she carried just a small purse. To anyone looking, she would appear to be an ordinary woman, maybe running errands on her day off or browsing cars during her lunch break. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and she stepped into the cool, air-conditioned showroom. The space was exactly as she had envisioned it during the renovation. Polished floors reflected the bright lights overhead, and the newest models were positioned perfectly to catch the eye of anyone entering. The smell of leather and new car interiors filled the air, creating that distinctive dealership atmosphere that either excited customers or intimidated them. A few other customers wandered around the showroom, some examining vehicles while others spoke quietly with sales representatives. The scene looked normal, professional even. But Amelia had learned to look beyond the surface. She wanted to see how her employees treated different types of customers, especially those who might not fit the typical profile of someone shopping for an expensive car. She moved slowly through the showroom, taking mental notes of everything she observed. The sales staff seemed attentive to some customers while completely ignoring others. She noticed how quickly they approached well-dressed customers, particularly older white men in business suits, while seeming to avoid younger customers or those dressed more casually. As she walked toward a beautiful luxury SUV in the center of the showroom, she could feel eyes on her. Not the interested, helpful gaze of a salesperson eager to assist, but something else entirely. It was the kind of look she had experienced too many times in her life, the look that said she didn't belong here, that she was somehow out of place in this upscale environment. The vehicle she approached was stunning. It was exactly the kind of car that represented success and achievement, the type her customers worked hard to afford. She ran her hand along the smooth paint and peered through the windows at the luxury interior. The price tag reflected the quality, but it wasn't beyond what many people could afford, especially with financing options. As she examined the vehicle, she became aware of hushed conversations nearby. Sales staff were glancing in her direction and whispering to each other. She couldn't make out the words, but their body language spoke volumes. Some seemed uncertain about whether to approach her, while others appeared to be actively avoiding her section of the showroom. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, in her own business, being treated like an unwelcome intruder. She had worked decades to build the success that allowed her to own places like this, yet her appearance and race seemed to override any assumption that she might be a legitimate customer. She remembered her first experience buying a car years ago, fresh out of college with her accounting degree. Even then, dressed in her best professional outfit and carrying all the necessary paperwork, She had faced skepticism and dismissive treatment. That experience had motivated her to eventually enter the automotive industry herself, determined to create spaces where all customers were treated with respect and dignity. Now, as the owner of multiple dealerships, she had thought those days were behind her. But standing in her own showroom, feeling the weight of judgmental stares and whispered comments, she realized that ownership didn't shield her from the same prejudices she had faced as a young professional. The other customers in the showroom were receiving completely different treatment. She watched as a middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt was immediately approached by an enthusiastic salesperson who began explaining features and benefits of various models. A young couple looking at economy cars were treated with patience and respect, even though they were clearly shopping for something much less expensive, but she remained invisible to the sales staff, or perhaps too visible in all the wrong ways. As she continued her examination of the SUV, she could sense someone finally approaching from behind. The footsteps were slow, almost reluctant. When she turned around, she saw a young salesperson who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. His name tag read Jake, and his expression suggested he was here more out of obligation than genuine interest in helping her. The moment had arrived. This was exactly why she had come here today, dressed as she was, acting as she was. This was the test that would reveal the true character of her business and her employees. She had hoped to be proven wrong, to find that her dealership was different from the others, that her investment in training and her clear policies about treating all customers equally had created the kind of environment she envisioned. But as Jake approached with his reluctant demeanor and barely concealed skepticism, she realized that her worst fears might be about to come true. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of this particular employee, but potentially the future direction of her entire business. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for what was about to unfold, knowing that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most uncomfortable moments. Jake walked over with the kind of slow, dragging steps that said he really didn't want to be doing this. His whole body language screamed reluctance, like he was being forced to clean up a mess he didn't create. When he finally reached where Amelia stood examining the luxury SUV, he didn't even try to hide his lack of enthusiasm. "You just looking around, or what?" he asked, his voice flat and uninterested. There was no smile, no welcoming greeting, none of the professional courtesy that should be standard in any business, especially one as upscale as this dealership claimed to be. Amelia looked up from the vehicle she had been examining, keeping her expression neutral despite the rude greeting. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before, but it never got easier. The difference was that today she had the power to do something about it. "I'm interested in this SUV," she replied calmly, running her hand along the sleek surface. "Could you tell me more about the features?" Jake barely glanced at the vehicle, as if he couldn't be bothered to actually do his job. "Yeah, well, this one's pretty expensive," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "You might want to look at something more realistic. We got some used cars on the other side of the lot that might be more in your price range." The assumption hit her like a slap in the face. Without knowing anything about her financial situation, her credit score, or her ability to purchase the vehicle, he had already decided she couldn't afford it. The judgment was written all over his face, and it had nothing to do with the modest clothes she wore and everything to do with the color of her skin. "I'm specifically interested in this model," Amelia said, maintaining her professional composure, even though anger was building inside her chest. "What kind of financing options do you have available?" Jake let out a small laugh that wasn't meant to be funny. "Look, lady, I'm trying to save you some time here. This car costs more than most people make in a year. Maybe you should think about what you can actually afford before you waste both our time." Other customers in the showroom were starting to notice the interaction. A well-dressed couple nearby slowed their conversation to listen, while an elderly man examining a sedan turned his head slightly in their direction. The attention made Jake even more confident in his dismissive attitude, as if he was putting on a show for an audience. "I understand the price," Amelia said, her voice steady. but with an edge that Jake was too arrogant to notice. What I need to know is whether you're willing to treat me like a serious customer or if I should find someone else who actually wants to make a sale. Before Jake could respond, footsteps approached from across the showroom. A man in his 40s, wearing a slightly rumpled suit and a manager's badge, walked over with a frown on his face. His name tag identified him as Derek Thompson, sales manager. Instead of coming to help resolve the situation professionally, his expression suggested he viewed Amelia as the problem that needed to be solved. "Is there some kind of issue here?" Thompson asked, but he was looking at Amelia when he said it. Not at Jake. The implication was clear. She was the issue, not the poor customer service she was receiving. "I was asking about this vehicle," Amelia explained, gesturing toward the SUV. "Your salesperson seems to think I can't afford it without knowing anything about my financial situation." Thompson looked her up and down, taking in her casual clothes and making the same assumptions Jake had made. "Well, this is a high-end dealership," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "We cater to a specific clientele. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of the other lots in town. There's a place about 10 minutes down the road that might have what you're looking for." The coded language wasn't lost on Amelia. She had heard variations of this speech throughout her career, always delivered with the same fake politeness that barely concealed the real message. "You're not welcome here. Go somewhere else. Find your own kind. I'm comfortable right here," she said firmly. "And I'm interested in purchasing this vehicle. Are you going to help me, or should I take my business elsewhere?" Thompson's fake smile disappeared entirely. "Look, I don't want any trouble here. We have other customers who are trying to shop in peace, and frankly, you're making them uncomfortable." Amelia glanced around the showroom. The other customers were indeed watching, but they didn't look uncomfortable with her presence. They looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, the blatant discrimination happening right in front of them. "I'm making them uncomfortable?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "By asking questions about a car I'm interested in buying? By causing a scene," Thompson shot back. "This is a respectable business, and we don't tolerate disruptive behavior. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Jake stood beside his manager, nodding along like he was proud of how the situation was being handled. Other sales staff had gathered at a distance, pretending to work while obviously listening to every word of the confrontation. "Disruptive behavior?" Amelia repeated, her professional mask finally starting to slip. "I walked into this dealership as a potential customer, asked legitimate questions about a vehicle, and was treated with disrespect and discrimination. The only disruptive behavior I see is coming from your staff." Thompson crossed his arms, his stance becoming more aggressive. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but it's not going to work. You can't just walk in here and make accusations. This is a legitimate business, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." The legal phrase was carefully chosen. Thompson clearly knew enough about discrimination law to use language that sounded official while still achieving his goal of getting rid of an unwanted customer. But he had no idea who he was talking to or what kind of mistake he was making. "You're refusing me service?" Amelia asked, wanting to be absolutely clear about what was happening. "I'm asking you to leave," Thompson said firmly. "If you don't go voluntarily, I'll have to call security." The threat hung in the air like a challenge. Around the showroom, other customers had stopped pretending to shop and were openly staring at the confrontation. Some looked shocked, others embarrassed, and a few appeared angry on Amelia's behalf. Jake seemed to be enjoying the drama, probably thinking he would have a good story to tell his friends later about how his manager handled a difficult situation. He had no idea that this moment would become the defining event of his career. Though not in the way he imagined, Amelia reached into her purse, her movements deliberate and calm despite the storm of emotions inside her. She pulled out a business card, holding it between two fingers like a small but powerful weapon. "Before you call security," she said, her voice now carrying a different tone entirely, "I think you should know who you're talking to." She placed the card on Thompson's desk with a soft tap that somehow managed to sound like thunder in the suddenly quiet showroom. Thompson glanced down at the card, then back at her face, then down at the card again. The color began to drain from his face as the words on the card sank in. This was about to become a very different kind of conversation. Thompson stared at the business card for what felt like an eternity. The small piece of paper seemed to burn in his vision as he read the words over and over again. Dr. Amelia Richardson, CEO and principal owner, Richardson Automotive Group. Below that, in smaller text, was the address of the corporate headquarters and a phone number he recognized. His mouth went dry. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of joke or mistake. The woman standing in front of him, the one he had just threatened to have removed by security, couldn't possibly be the owner of the dealership. Could she? "This is fake," he said, but his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. He held up the card like it was evidence in a court case. Anyone can print up a business card. "You think I'm stupid?" Amelia watched him carefully, noting how his confident demeanor was already starting to crack. She had seen this reaction before, though never in quite such a dramatic situation. "You think it's fake?" she asked calmly. "That's interesting." Jake looked confused, glancing back and forth between his manager and the woman who had just dropped what seemed like a bomb into their conversation. "What's going on?" he asked Thompson in a whisper that everyone could hear. "Nothing," Thompson snapped, but sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. "This lady is trying to pull some kind of scam. Probably thinks she can threaten us with a fake business card and get a free car or something." But even as he said it, doubt was creeping into his voice. The card looked professional, expensive even, the kind of quality printing that wasn't easy to fake. And there was something about the way Amelia was standing there, completely calm and composed, that made him nervous. "You know what?" Amelia said, settling into a chair near Thompson's desk without being invited. "Since you think the card is fake, let me tell you a few things about this dealership that maybe only the real owner would know." Thompson's eyes widened slightly, but he tried to maintain his aggressive stance. "I don't have time for games." "This isn't a game," Amelia replied, her voice taking on a different quality. Gone was the patient customer trying to make a purchase. This was the voice of someone who was used to being in charge, someone who commanded respect in boardrooms and business meetings. "Let's start with last month's sales figures," she continued, speaking in a conversational tone that somehow felt more threatening than shouting would have been. "You moved 43 vehicles in June. That's down from 51 in May, which was already disappointing compared to your target of 60. Thompson's face went pale. "Those numbers weren't public information." "They weren't even shared with all the staff?" "Only the management team and the owner would have access to those specific figures." "Lucky guess," he said, but his voice was getting weaker. "Your top salesperson is David Chun," Amelia continued as if she hadn't heard him. "He's been with the company for 8 years and consistently outsells everyone else on the floor. Your worst performer is Billy Martinez, who's been here for 6 months and has only closed 12 deals in that entire time." Jake was now staring at her with his mouth slightly open. These weren't things a random customer would know. These were internal details that only someone with access to personnel files and sales reports would have. "Your biggest challenge right now is customer retention," Amelia went on, her voice steady and factual. "You're getting people to buy cars, but they're not coming back for service, and they're not recommending you to their friends. Your customer satisfaction scores are sitting at 3.2 out of 5, which is well below industry standard." Thompson tried to interrupt, but she held up a hand to stop him. "You've been having trouble with your parts department?" she continued. "The inventory system is outdated, and customers are waiting too long for repairs. I approved a budget increase 3 months ago specifically to address this issue, but I haven't seen any improvement yet." The showroom had gone completely quiet. Other customers and staff members were no longer pretending to mind their own business. They were openly listening to what sounded like the most awkward performance review in history. "The reason your sales numbers are down," Amelia said, standing up from the chair, "is because word is getting around about the kind of treatment customers receive here. People talk, Thompson. They share their experiences on social media, they tell their friends, and they warn others about businesses that don't treat them with respect. Thompson's hands were shaking slightly as he looked down at the business card again. The evidence was overwhelming, but accepting it meant acknowledging that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. "I want to speak to the general manager," Amelia said, pulling out her phone. "Patricia Wells should be in the building today. Let's give her a call, shall we?" The mention of the general manager's name was the final nail in the coffin. Patricia Wells was someone Thompson spoke to regularly, but her name wasn't something a random customer would know. It wasn't on any public directory or website. "Wait," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just died a minute." But Amelia was already dialing. She held the phone to her ear, and when someone answered, she spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the showroom. "Patricia, it's Amelia Richardson. I'm here at the dealership, and I need you to come to the showroom immediately. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Even from a distance, people could hear the voice on the other end of the line change from casual to urgent. "Of course, Dr. Richardson. I'll be right there." "Is everything okay?" "We'll discuss it when you get here," Amelia said, ending the call. The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson was now visibly sweating, his face switching between pale and red as the reality of his situation sank in. Jake looked like he was about to be sick, finally understanding that something had gone very, very wrong. Other customers in the showroom were whispering among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a very interesting situation. A few were shaking their heads in disgust at what they had witnessed. "She's really the owner?" Jake asked in a small voice, looking at Thompson for reassurance that wasn't coming. Thompson couldn't speak. He just stood there, holding the business card like it was evidence of his own professional execution. In his mind, he was probably calculating how quickly he could clean out his desk and whether he would be able to find another job in the automotive industry after this. Amelia looked around the showroom, making eye contact with various staff members, who quickly looked away. She was no longer the customer being discriminated against. She was the owner whose business had been damaged by the unprofessional conduct of her employees. "While we're waiting for Patricia," she said, her voice carrying across the showroom, "maybe you'd like to explain to me exactly what kind of training you've been providing to your sales staff regarding customer service and equal treatment of all potential buyers." Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? How could he explain that he had just threatened to have the owner of the dealership removed by security? How could he justify the way he and Jake had treated her based on nothing more than assumptions and prejudice? The sound of quick footsteps echoed from the hallway leading to the offices. Patricia Wells was coming, and with her arrival, the reckoning that Thompson and Jake had been dreading was about to begin. The sound of heels clicking rapidly across the tile floor announced Patricia Wells' arrival before anyone could see her. She appeared from the hallway that led to the administrative offices, moving with the kind of urgent pace that suggested she knew something serious was happening. Her professional smile was already in place, but there was concern in her eyes as she scanned the unusually quiet showroom. When Patricia spotted Amelia standing near Thompson's desk, her expression immediately shifted from concern to recognition, then to something that looked like panic as she took in the scene. Thompson was pale and sweating. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and several customers were obviously watching the drama unfold with great interest. "Dr. Richardson," Patricia said, extending her hand in greeting while trying to assess the situation. "What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting you today." Amelia shook her hand but didn't return the smile. "Hello, Patricia. I'm afraid this isn't exactly a social visit." Patricia's eyes darted between Amelia and Thompson, clearly trying to figure out what had gone wrong. As the general manager, she was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the dealership, and having the owner show up unexpectedly was never a good sign. "I had decided to pay an unannounced visit to see how things were running," Amelia continued, her voice carrying across the showroom so that everyone could hear. I wanted to experience firsthand what it's like to be a customer here. The word customer hung in the air with particular weight, and Patricia's face began to show understanding. She looked at Amelia's casual clothes, then at Thompson's obvious distress, and started to piece together what might have happened. And how did that go? Patricia asked carefully, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. Well, Amelia said, turning to look at Thompson, your sales manager here threatened to have me removed from the premises by security because he felt I was making other customers uncomfortable. Patricia's face went completely white. In all her years of managing retail operations, she had never heard of anything quite so catastrophic. The owner of the company being threatened with removal from her own business was the kind of nightmare scenario that could end careers and close locations. I'm sorry, what? Patricia asked, clearly hoping she had misheard. Thompson finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was. She was dressed casual, and I thought ... You thought what? Amelia interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through his excuses. That someone who looks like me and dresses like me couldn't possibly be a serious customer? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the showroom knew exactly what she was talking about, but saying it out loud made it impossible to pretend it hadn't happened. Jake, who had been silent since the revelation of Amelia's identity, suddenly spoke up. We were just trying to help her find something more affordable. We didn't mean any harm. The comment was so tone-deaf that several customers visibly winced. Even Thompson closed his eyes as if he couldn't believe Jake had just made the situation worse. More affordable? Amelia repeated, her voice rising slightly. Based on what information? Did you run a credit check? Did you ask about my income? Did you inquire about my budget? Jake stammered, realizing he had just dug himself into a deeper hole. No, but we just thought. You thought what you always think, Amelia said, her professional composure finally cracking to reveal the anger underneath. You made assumptions based on how I look and what I was wearing. You decided I didn't belong here before I even opened my mouth. Patricia was frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, but it was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. The damage was done, and it was happening in front of an audience of customers who were likely to share this story far and wide. Dr. Richardson, Patricia said, her voice shaking slightly, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that this does not represent the values of this dealership. Doesn't it? Amelia asked, turning her attention to Patricia. Because this is exactly the kind of behavior that's been driving down our customer satisfaction scores. This is why people aren't coming back. This is why our reputation in the community is suffering. She gestured toward the gathered customers, some of whom were nodding in agreement. These people just witnessed your staff discriminate against someone based on their appearance. They saw your sales manager threaten to have someone removed for the crime of asking questions about a car they were interested in buying. One of the customers, an elderly woman who had been shopping for a sedan, spoke up. This is disgusting, she said loudly. I've never seen anything like this in my life. Another customer, a middle-aged man, shook his head. I was thinking about buying a truck here, but not after seeing this. This is wrong on every level. The comments from actual customers hit Patricia like physical blows. These were people who had come here to spend money, and now they were witnessing the kind of treatment that would make them never want to return. We need to address this immediately, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. What could she possibly do to fix something this bad? Yes, we do, Amelia agreed. And we're going to address it right here, right now, in front of everyone. Thompson seemed to realize that his career was about to end in the most public way possible. Dr. Richardson, please, can we discuss this privately? I know I made a mistake, but I don't think we need to. Need to what? Amelia interrupted. Need to let everyone see the consequences of discrimination? Need to show what happens when employees treat customers badly based on their prejudices. She turned to address the entire showroom, speaking in a voice that commanded attention. I want everyone here to understand something. This business belongs to me. I worked for decades to build the success that allowed me to buy this dealership. I've invested my money, my time, and my reputation in making this a place where all customers are treated with respect." The showroom was completely silent except for her voice. Even the soft background music seemed to have stopped. "What you witnessed today is exactly what I came here to find," she continued. "I suspected that some of my customers were being treated poorly, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed to experience what it feels like to be judged and dismissed, based on nothing more than appearance." Thompson made one last desperate attempt to save his job. "Dr. Richardson, I've been in the car business for 15 years. I've never had a complaint like this before. This was just a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the business." "Protect it from what?" Amelia asked. "From making a sale? From treating a customer with dignity? From doing your job professionally?" Jake, apparently not understanding that staying quiet was his best option, decided to speak again. "We get all kinds of people in here. Some of them are just wasting time. Not serious about buying. We have to be careful." The comment was the final straw. Patricia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that Jake had just sealed both his fate and Thompson's. "Careful about what?" Amelia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Careful about treating black customers like they might actually have money? Careful about assuming that someone who doesn't look like your ideal customer might still be able to afford your cars?" The accusation of racial discrimination was now out in the open, impossible to ignore or explain away. The customers in the showroom were recording with their phones, and the story was about to spread far beyond the walls of the dealership. Thompson's shoulders sagged in defeat. He knew there was no coming back from this. The silence in the showroom was deafening. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Thompson stood frozen like a deer in headlights, while Jake looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Amelia took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. This was the moment she had been building toward, not just today, but throughout her entire career. Every time she had faced discrimination, every time someone had underestimated her because of her race or gender, it had led to this moment when she finally had the power to make things right. "Thompson," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you're fired. Effective immediately." The words hit the showroom like a thunderclap. Several customers gasped, and one person actually dropped their phone. Thompson's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, panic, and finally, a kind of hollow acceptance. "You can't be serious," he stammered. 15 years in this business. I've got a family, a mortgage. This was just a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Amelia replied firmly. "A mistake is adding numbers wrong or forgetting to order parts. What you did was make a deliberate choice to treat me badly because of how I look. That's not a mistake. That's discrimination, and it has no place in my business." She turned to Patricia, who was standing there looking like she had just witnessed a natural disaster. "I want security to escort Mr. Thompson from the building. He's no longer an employee of this company." Patricia nodded quickly, pulling out her phone to call security. Her hands were shaking as she dialed, clearly understanding that her own job might be on the line depending on how she handled the aftermath of this situation. Thompson made one last desperate plea. "Dr. Richardson, please, give me another chance. I'll do sensitivity training, I'll apologize to everyone, I'll do whatever you want. Just don't destroy my career over this." Amelia looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You destroyed your own career the moment you decided to treat a customer like garbage." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting my business and my other customers from having to experience what I just went through." She gestured toward the people who had witnessed the entire incident. "These people came here to buy cars, and instead they got a front row seat to watch discrimination in action. Do you think they're going to recommend this dealership to their friends after what they saw today?" Indeed, several customers were already heading toward the exit, clearly having seen enough. One woman stopped at the door and called back, "I'll be sure to tell everyone I know about what happened here today." Jake, who had been silent during Thompson's firing, suddenly realized he might be next. "What about me?" he asked in a small voice. I was just following his lead. I didn't know any better. Amelia turned her attention to the young salesperson, studying his face carefully. She saw fear there, but also something that might have been genuine remorse, though it was hard to tell if he was sorry for his actions or just sorry he got caught. "You're not fired," she said finally, and Jake's relief was visible. "But you're on probation. You'll receive a formal written warning that goes in your permanent file, and you'll be required to complete diversity and customer service training before you can continue working here." Jake nodded eagerly, clearly grateful to still have a job. "Yes, ma'am, I'll do whatever you want." "I'm really sorry about what happened." "Sorry isn't enough," Amelia said. "You need to understand why what you did was wrong. You need to learn that every customer who walks through that door deserves respect, regardless of what they look like or how they're dressed." She turned to address the entire showroom, speaking to customers and staff alike. "I want everyone to understand something. This business will not tolerate discrimination of any kind. We don't judge customers based on their race, their clothes, their age, or any other factor except their interest in our vehicles." Security had arrived and was standing near Thompson, waiting for instructions. He looked smaller somehow, like the authority he had wielded just minutes ago had deflated out of him completely. "From now on," Amelia continued, "every employee at this dealership will undergo mandatory training on diversity, inclusion, and professional customer service. We will have regular evaluations, and we will have mystery shoppers coming in to test how our staff treats different types of customers." She paused, looking directly at several staff members who had been watching the drama unfold. "If anyone here has a problem with treating all customers equally, now would be a good time to find a different job. Because this is how things are going to be from now on." Patricia stepped forward, clearly wanting to show that she was taking the situation seriously. "Dr. Richardson, I want to personally apologize for what happened today. I had no idea that our staff was behaving this way, and I take full responsibility for the failure in management that allowed this to occur." Amelia nodded, acknowledging the apology, but making it clear that words alone wouldn't be enough. "Patricia, you're responsible for implementing the new training programs I just mentioned. You're also responsible for creating a system that ensures this never happens again." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm sending a message to all our other dealership locations about what happened here today. This incident will be used as a training example across the entire company. Everyone needs to understand that this behavior is unacceptable and will result in immediate termination." The remaining customers in the showroom were watching with a mixture of fascination and approval. One elderly gentleman actually started clapping, and soon others joined in. The applause was for more than just the firing of Thompson. It was for the stand that Amelia had taken against discrimination. "This is how business should be done," the elderly man said loudly. "Good for you, young lady. You've got integrity." A woman with her teenage daughter added, "My daughter just learned an important lesson about standing up for what's right. Thank you for not letting this slide." As security escorted Thompson toward the exit, he turned back one last time. "This isn't over," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You can't just fire people for trying to do their jobs." "I can fire people for discriminating against customers," Amelia replied calmly, "and I will, every single time." After Thompson was gone, the atmosphere in the showroom began to shift. The tension that had been building throughout the confrontation started to ease. Replaced by something that felt like relief and renewal, Amelia walked over to the luxury SUV she had been examining when the whole incident began. "Now," she said, running her hand along the vehicle's surface, "let's talk about this car. I'm still interested in buying it." Jake, still shaken but eager to prove himself, approached carefully. "I'd be happy to help you with that, Dr. Richardson. What would you like to know about it?" For the first time that day, Amelia smiled. "I want to know everything. And I want you to treat me exactly the way you would treat any other customer who walked in here ready to make a purchase." As Jake began explaining the features of the SUV, other customers started to relax and return to their own shopping. The Staff, having witnessed the consequences of poor behavior, began approaching customers with a new level of professionalism and respect. Later, as Amelia completed the paperwork for her new vehicle, she reflected on the day's events. It had been painful to experience discrimination in her own business, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes change only comes when problems are brought into the light and dealt with directly. The story of what happened at the dealership would spread quickly through the community and beyond. Some people would share it as an example of justice being served, others as a cautionary tale about the consequences of discrimination. But most importantly, it would serve as a reminder that respect and dignity should be the foundation of every business interaction. As she drove her new SUV off the lot, Amelia knew that the real work was just beginning. Creating lasting change would require ongoing effort, constant vigilance, and the courage to continue standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. But today had been a good start.